Hello, my name is Jonathan Killinger. This is my media assignment project. I will be talking about the topic I've chosen is Chinese foreign policy under Xi Jinping. I would like to say that this is an important issue for contemporary foreign policy for two main reasons. First, Chinese territorial acquisitions are gained through force or threats of violence in some cases, and it is important to closely monitor these threats and how China conducts their business in order to respond accordingly. Secondly, China has made it clear that it will shape the world to its liking without much or any consideration for its regional neighbors. I will argue that the assertiveness of foreign policy under Xi Jinping can be primarily attributed to the growing competition with the United States as a world power. To support my thesis, I will be making the following four central arguments. First, I will show that the Belt and Road Initiative is a massive incentive for China to invest or control large swaths of land around the globe. Secondly, controlling more territory gives China more access to natural resources for its growing population. Thirdly, connected, China's growing population requires an outward expansion. Finally, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States has been arguably the world's most powerful nation. The national culture of China and the psychology of the CCP encourages Chinese foreign policy to be expansionist and perfectionist in nature, which brings it into conflict with its neighbors. From Peter Ferdinand, in other words, it was the dream of a successful modern China rather than the dream of success for individual Chinese. And continuing, it was the CCP that brought this about. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, had completed the liberation of China from imperialism and had built a rich and powerful, democratic, civilized, socialist, modernizing China. I would first like to expand on the national culture and psychology that promotes this international policy. From the article from Connor Fiddler, the aim of Chinese foreign policy is to help secure and legitimize one party rule in China. They have three leading institutions to promote that goal: the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the International Liaison Department, and the United Front Work Department. I'll go into some detail about each of these organizations. The first organization I'd like to speak about is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also known as the MFA. It is the most prominent body for Chinese foreign policy, mostly in charge of conducting state to state diplomacy. However, you should not make comparisons between the MFA and the U.S. State Department. While the U.S. State Department at its core is a U.S. foreign policy making process, the MFA is to provide the logistical skeleton for foreign policy implementation and messaging. For example, the foreign minister, Wang Yi, is not China's highest ranking diplomat. Secondly, I would like to point out that the party level. While the MFA does conduct foreign policy for the state, the party has its own department to promote a separate foreign policy agenda. That organization is the International Liaison Department, also known as the ILD. The ILD plays an important and unique strategic role in CCP diplomacy. Today, its mandate is broadened to include all political parties. It is tasked with identifying ambitious and talented politicians within ruling and opposition parties for the purpose of building support for Chinese foreign policy aims. Connor Fiddler in his article writes that the US China competition is multidimensional and to understanding the work of the ILD is crucial. Finally, I would like to speak about the United Front Work Department, the UFWD. The UFWD plays a unique and ambitious role in Chinese foreign policy strategy. For example, in the United States, the UFWD goes to great lengths to control the narrative within Chinese language newspapers. This has resulted in articles highlighting Xi Jinping's leadership and downplaying the deaths of human rights activists. The goal of this strategy is simple: to create domestic demand for pro CCP policies. Moving on from China's government, I would like to speak about its people. The current population of China is 1.412 billion people. Of course, the government of China is very concerned about the complacency of its people, as a people without food or shelter is a people primed for revolt. While birth rates have been decreasing in the last few decades, 1.4 billion people is still a lot of mouths to feed. The article from Wang Junyo, Tomoko Kinosuga, and Shiyuki Hamori, called An Empirical Analysis of the Relationship Between Economic Development and Population Growth in China, goes into more detail about the problems China faces in regards to its growing population. The authors say that two paradigms are predominant when assessing the impact of population on an economy, namely the Malthusian and the Boisserian paradigms. In the Malthusian paradigm, if population grows at a greater rate than does technological change, societies cannot attain more than subsistent levels of income. Moreover, the Boisserian paradigm has influenced some androgynous growth models by insisting that high population growth induces technological change, thereby enabling countries to escape from the Malthusian trap. I will refer to the Malthusian paradigm as a pessimist view and the Boisserian paradigm as an optimist view. In restating, the pessimist view says that, still from Yeo et al., increasing resource consumption through an exploding human population growing at a geometric rate, as well as greater and greater pollution, the authors concluded, would lead to serious food shortages and resource depletion. But atmospheric pollution and environmental destruction would be the ultimate cause of societal collapse. The optimist view spins this idea on its head. It says that population growth, by spurring demand as well as the desire to consume and invest, and providing incentives to improve workforce quality and develop technologies, positively influences economic development. Some problems that the authors of this article point out are that as population increases, GDP decreases, leading to a lesser standard of living for the average citizen. Secondly, more people in a population means to a larger elderly population. A larger elderly population means that there needs to be organizations that assist elder population, thus reducing the level of a standard workforce. According to these authors, there is no topic of greater importance for China's economic development than the expansion of non-agricultural employment, and whether the country can benefit from a demographic dividend is seen as a product of not only the percentage of its working age population, but also its ability to increase non-agricultural employment. How do they plan to do this? By expanding their relative power. Darren Lim and Victor Ferguson write in their article 5 ways that China influences world change. I'll read a bit about each of the 5 methods that China uses to influence their will on the world stage. Firstly, the authors say that China uses coercion to impose their power on regional nations. Coercion, the authors say, takes place where China imposes or threatens costs on a target to change its behavior. For example, they note that when South Korea agreed to jointly deploy a U.S.-supplied terminal high-altitude area defense missile system, China curtailed the import of certain Korean goods, services, restricted tourism to Korea, and disrupted operations of key Korean firms on the mainland China. Combined, these measures were estimated to have shaved off 0.4% off South Korea's economic growth in 2017. The authors say that the purpose of inflicting these economic costs appeared to push Seoul to reverse their decision for a U.S.-supplied terminal high-altitude area defense missile system. However, the authors say Beijing appears to have had limited success so far. The second method China uses is just regular bargaining. The authors state that bargaining power is exercised through voluntary exchange, where a state exchanges or offers to exchange something of value with the target. For example, Taiwan was the Dominican Republic, Burkina Faso, and El Salvador severed ties with Taiwan in exchange for economic benefits from Beijing. Thirdly, the third method is agenda setting. Agenda setting occurs where a state is able to shape the parameters of what is legitimate or feasible for other states to do within a specific institutional framework or issue area. A perfect example of this is Taiwan. China tries to exert a lot of force on Taiwan, and so by allowing what it can or cannot do and what other countries can or cannot do with regard to trade with Taiwan greatly impacts how much power they have on the island. Fourth, China can use persuasion. The authors say that persuasion is a use of communication to alter beliefs about what is true, right, or appropriate. For example, Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, through public, diplomatic, and other channels, the Chinese government has consistently provided information about its capabilities, deployment trajectory, and strategic intentions to Southeast Asian states concerned about China's rise. The main goal, the authors say, has been to minimize concerns about the China threat and encourage greater engagement with Beijing. Finally, attraction. The authors also say is commonly termed as soft power, operates where it targets beliefs and possibly actions change to become more aligned with the attracting state's preferences due to an admiration or a desire to emulate. For example, in 2007, President Hu Jintao called for greater investment in soft power. Beijing had spent billions supporting initiatives to cultivate positive perceptions of China abroad, including educational and cultural exchanges and staging of cultural exhibitions and concerts. Yet, China's greatest source of attraction may be its post-Mao economic model, which has raised hundreds of millions out of poverty, and potentially provides a template for other developing nations to emulate. Through the methods of coercion and agenda setting, we can see how China addresses its relationship with Taiwan. In a research report titled China Confronts Taiwan, the authors outline several ways that China has harmed Taiwan and has asserted its power over it. For example, it's made it more difficult for Taiwan sympathetic scholars and business leaders to work in China. It has worked to push Taiwan out of international systems and reduce its diplomatic allies. It has significantly increased its military intimidation of Taiwan, and has cut all official cross-strait exchanges, reduced the flow of Chinese group tourists, and banned individual travel by Chinese citizens to the island. The authors assert that support for Taiwan is now stronger in the United States than in many decades, including in Congress and by the American public. They say that Congress passed the Taiwan Travel Act in 2018 and the Taipei Act and Taiwan Assurance Act in 2020 to strengthen U.S.-Taiwan relations. The authors continue to say that 15 Republican and 9 Democratic senators make up the Senate Taiwan Caucus, and 62 Republicans and 58 Democrats are part of the group's counterpart in the House. According to a poll conducted in July and August of 2020 by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, used a 10-point scale to gauge willingness to defend allies. It was revealed that the American public was more than eager to defend Taiwan, with an average response of 6.69, then Australia 6.38. Appetites for defending Japan, Korea, or other unspecified target in the South China Sea were also comparable to results in Taiwan. Moving to a more recent, the Biden administration will seek to strengthen U.S. alliances and power projection into the Asia-Pacific in order to increase deterrence against a People's Republic of China attack on Taiwan. The United States will become better positioned and more influential in the region than in recent years. Taiwan is not the only place where China is flexing its economic and military muscles. To speak about Chinese foreign policy, you must speak about the massive Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's colossal infrastructure investment that may usher a new era of trade and growth for economies in Asia and beyond. According to an article written by James McBride, Noah Berman, and Edward Chatsky from the Council of Foreign Relations, China's New Belt and Road Initiative is one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects ever conceived. It was launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping with a vast collection of development and investment initiatives, which was originally devised to link East Asia and Europe through physical infrastructure. Since then, the project has expanded to Africa, Oceania, and Latin America, significantly broadening China's economic and political influence. The name Belt and Road Initiative comes from the plan's two-pronged system, the Overland Silk Road Economic Belt and the Maritime Silk Road. The two were collectively referred to at first as the One Belt, One Road Initiative, but eventually became the Belt and Road Initiative. Xi's vision, Xi Jinping, the president, includes a vast network of railways, energy pipelines, highways, and a streamlined border crossings, both westward, through the mountainous former Soviet republics, and southward to Pakistan, India, and the rest of Southeast Asia. Such a network would expand the international use of Chinese currency and break the bottleneck in Asian connectivity, according to Xi. In addition, the authors say, to physical infrastructure, China has funded hundreds of special economic zones or industrial areas designed to create jobs and encourage countries to embrace its tech offerings, such as the 5G network powered by telecommunications giant Huawei. China, so far as of the writing of this article, has signed on 147 countries. 147 countries have signed on to projects or have indicated an interest in doing so. These countries range from Peru, Ukraine, and many countries in Africa, as well as Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, New Zealand, and Kazakhstan. For Xi, the authors say, the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, serves as a pushback against the much-touted pivot to Asia, U.S.'s plan of a pivot for Asia, as well as a way for China to develop new trade linkages, cultivate export markets, boost Chinese incomes, and export China's excess product capacity. The authors cite CFR David Sachs, who is an expert on U.S.-China relations. China has had a fair amount of success in redrawing trade maps around the world in ways that put China at the center and not the U.S. or Europe. Authors continue, at the same time, China is motivated to boost global economic links to its western regions, which historically have been neglected. More broadly, Chinese leaders, the authors continue, are determined to restructure the economy to avoid the so-called middle income gap. They say in this scenario, which has plagued close to 90% of middle-income countries since 1960, wages go up and life improves as low-skilled manufacturing rises, but countries struggle to then shift to producing high-value goods and services. Now, what would we say we would call the state of the Belt and Road Initiative today? Well, according to Andrea Brinza, the BRI is becoming less and less prominent in Chinese leaders' speeches as the Global Development Initiative takes over. Andrea says that the Belt and Road Initiative has been China's main branding strategy for its foreign policy over the last decade, and was systematically and frenetically associated with Xi Jinping. But in actuality, Xi has been among the leaders who have used the term the least in their speeches as of late. The official name of Belt and Road Initiative has ceased to really exist in Xi Jinping's speeches in 2022. The BRI is not only disappearing from the president's speeches, but also from his agenda. Brinza says that while in 2017 and in 2019, Xi was using the Belt and Road Forum to welcome leaders from all over the world to Beijing. However, in these past few years, the BRI didn't have a presidential forum. It was mostly covered by the foreign minister, Wang Yi. Xi is not the only leader transitioning from the Belt and Road Initiative to Belt and Road Cooperation. So has Wang Yi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Wang wasn't only the host of the last Belt and Road Forum in 2021, but also the Chinese leader who promoted the BRI the most in his speeches, in an era where the BRI is fading away. Of course, the actual physical ideas of what the BRI is working for has not disappeared. They've just been put on the back burner so they don't draw as much attention. Well, why is the Belt and Road Initiative becoming just Belt and Road Cooperation? The BRI's image has been affected very much so over the past 5 years by accusations of debt traps, colonialism, ecological issues, and poor standards. Instead of fighting to erase those labels and to finally define the scope and purpose of the BRI, China came up with a little mini version of the BRI. The Global Development Initiative is thus the BRI in disguise, an old initiative that wants to look new while also remaining vaguely defined. What can the U.S. and the international community do in regards to the growing expansion of Chinese industry and influence? Well, they give 4 options. Either we can roll back Chinese gains by forcing them to withdraw from key features in the South China Sea. This comes from authors Hal Brands and Zach Cooper in their article Getting Serious About Strategy in the South China Sea. They could roll back their gains. They could contain them by forcing them to contain by growing no further and to limit how much influence China can spread to new locations. We could offset China's gains by penalizing China gains rather than by directly preventing them. Washington would respond to Chinese moves in the South China Sea by imposing costs, either diplomatic, economic, or otherwise. The last thing that the U.S. and the international community can do is just to accommodate China and be ready for the new world order that will grow after China has finished its expansion. This has been my podcast on the Chinese global growing foreign policy aggression. Hopefully you have learned something, and I have not been too boring in regards to my speech. And I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for a great class, and have a good summer.